All right, so I wanted to go over two examples of solving by factoring, just in case if maybe you missed a lesson or you just want to watch it again. Okay, so when we're solving a quadratic equation, what we're going to think about is finding zeros of a function, right? So we want to think about what does it mean to be finding a zero, and try to remember, so finding zeros of a function is when we have a function and we want to find all the x values that make the output or the answer be equal to 0. So the first thing we're going to start with is taking a look at our answer, and we could see that it's not currently equal to 0, right? It's equal to -1. So first we're going to make our output 0, right? So we want 0 here. All right, so in order to get a 0 there, I would have to add 1 to both sides. And I'm going to write it over here underneath -17 because -17 and 1 are like terms. So it would make my life easier to combine them. So I currently have x squared minus 16 equal to 0. My next step is to think of the left side of my equation as a function, right? So we have this function, x squared minus 16. And we want to find all the zeros. And in class, we talked about how when your function is in factored form, every factor reveals a 0 to you. So it would be really helpful if we factor this, okay? So in order to factor this, right, we want to find two numbers that multiply to -16x squared, or two terms, I must say. And this, they have to add up to 0 x's, right? So this was an example where we had 0 x's in the middle. So when we figure out the four terms, the two middle terms have to combine to 0. And in order to multiply to -16x squared and add up to 0x, I would need to use 4x, and -4x. So I'm going to break it up. And now that it is four terms, I can factor by grouping. So I factored common factor for this group. And in this group, my leading term is negative, so I'm going to factor out a -4. They both have an x plus 4 in common, so I end up with x plus 4, x minus 4. So this is extremely helpful because I'm really now looking for zeros of a function x plus 4 and times x minus 4, right? So every factor, I'm going to separate them, reveals a 0 to me. So the first 0 is going to come from this factor being equal to 0, and that happens when x is -4. And the second 0 is going to come from the factor on the right whenever it is equal to 0. So it looks like I have two zeros for a function x squared minus 16. Again, they were revealed when I factored it, and these x values are also going to be solutions to my original equation, right? So these are my two solutions. X equals -4, x equals +4. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at a second question where I do have to solve for all the values of x. All right, so this is my quadratic equation, and once again, we're going to think of this as finding 0 of a function. And in order to do that, we need to find all the x values that make an output equal to 0. So the first thing I have to make sure is that my output is actually 0. Right, so if I look right now on the right side, I have -4x minus 16, so it's definitely not 0. In order to get that to be a 0, I'm going to be adding 4x, and notice I am aligning like terms together to make my life easier. I'm going to add 6. And now my output is 0. So I know that I'm on the right track. So on the left side, we have x squared minus 5x minus 6. Again, so I'm going to think of this as my function. Right, so my function is x squared minus 5x minus 6. and I'm looking for all the zeros, so all of the x values that make my output or my answer equal to 0. In order to quickly get zeros, it would be really helpful to rewrite this function in factored form, right? Because we have, in factored form, all these zeros will be revealed to me somewhat easy. So I'm going to think of the factoring, right? So it's x squared, and we're going to break up the middle term. And I'm going to figure that out by finding two terms so that when I add them together, they have to give me negative 5x. And when I multiply them together, they have to give me negative 6x squared. And the two terms that would work for me, so let's think about this. I think negative 6x and 1x would work out for us. So minus 6x plus 1x minus 6. Now that I have four terms, I can easily group, right? So I have x minus 6, 1x minus 6. We're doing great because everything matches up. So this is my function in factored form, right? So now I'm looking for zeros of a function f of x minus 6 times x plus 1. So every factor will reveal a 0 to me, right? Because if I multiply something by 0, the answer is 0. So I'm going to look at this factor, and the x value that would make the first factor equal to 0 is 6. And then I'm going to look at the second factor, and I get my second 0 to be negative 1. So these are the zeros of my function. So those are the x values that make my output or my answer equal to 0. And they are also going to be my solutions to the original quadratic equation. So that's it, though. That's my answer. X equals 6 or x equals negative 1.